more chairs. There's 2 seats right here.
There's 3 seats here.
Okay. Come on in and sit down. Join the party. Hi, Alan. Wow, look what a wonderful turnout. I want to thank everybody for coming. I know you're here because Janet's here, and I don't blame you. But this is also a STCHS presentation. STCHS, as you know, is the local historical society. We run the museum in town, and we have membership forms here, just in case. Any of you who are not members, you can get direct emails from us, you can get our newsletter, and you can get informed of all of our upcoming fun events. And tonight I have here, I'm Harriet Cordelia, I'm the current president of STCHS, and I have several of my board members here tonight. I have Lindsay Laurent, and I have Kathy Brown, and I have, who else is here? Catherine didn't make it. Oh, okay, of course, Patricia Gibson and Scott Nelson. These people are all my right hands. They do wonderful work, and we're happy to have you here. Again, there's membership envelopes on the table, and we welcome you to join us. I want to go right ahead and get Janet and Meredith up here because they're going to entertain you and inform you. And did Janet leave? As if she needs an introduction, this is Janet Gregory.
Wow, I'm frightened. Well, thank you very much for that wonderful welcome. I really appreciate it. So the speakers tonight are going to be Meredith Pike Baky and myself. And our topic tonight is focused on Bert Pike. He was Boise Cascade's project manager for Pine Mountain Lake. And we're going to talk about how his vision and his hard work built this community. And of course, I'm thrown in the big, and the airport. So Meredith will introduce herself. I'm Janet Gregory, and my husband Ed and I bought our property in Pine Mountain Lake in 2006. We built a house up here on the west end of the airport, and we were at the time both escapees from both the Bay Area and from our careers. We moved here full-time in 2010, and many of you know this already, but we sold our house just a month and a half ago, and we now live in Sparks, Nevada. So, okay, and thank you for that, because we agree, because the Reno air races have moved on, and so we're very sad about that. But anyway, so the reason this talk kind of happened is, I'm buzzing, is that I was curious about where Groveland Airport actually came from and how it came into being. And so I'm up at the airport hanging out one day like airport people do, and Meredith is wandering around looking for a plaque that honored her father. So we bumped into each other, and I don't know if it was just good luck or providence that brought us together. But anyway, I was so excited to learn about this man who's called the father of the airport. Okay, let's jump in. Let me see if I can find the clicker. Let's jump in. All right, I'm taking you back to 1968. Boise Cascade, as I think everyone here knows, was the developer of Pine Mountain Lake. Boise Cascade was first formed in 1957 as 2 lumber companies came together. They both owned and managed timberlands, and what they wanted to do was expand into manufacturing and distributing lumber products. In late 1958, this merger, they actually jumped into the retail end of the business and had over 100 retail outlets. In the 1960s, they're continuing on their expansion, and they expanded into building-related products. Concrete ready-mix, textiles, sand and gravel, and, wait for it, real estate and recreation projects. In 1968 is when Boise Cascade began purchasing Groveland timberland. They also, in 1968, hired Bert Pike to be their project manager here for Pine Mountain Lake. In 1972, though, a very short amount of years, Boise Cascade decided to return to their core competency. Remember that date, 1972. Let's see, let me figure out how I'm going to fumble my paper here. I think I'm going to throw them on the ground, how's that? Okay, so everybody recognizes this picture of Pine Mountain Lake. Boise Cascade at its core is a forest products company. In 1968, they purchased 3,400 acres of timberland from 7 Groveland ranchers. And what did they do? Remember, they're a timber company. They cleared the land. They about clear-cut this area. They harvested the lumber and they milled the timber. Their lumber mill, which they owned, was at Montezuma Junction, just outside the Chinese camp. And my husband Ed and I drove by there and drove through Chinese camp. So sad, on fires. The estimate is that Pine Mountain Lake actually produced between 100 and 130 million board feet of lumber. Now, once the land was cleared, it was available for development. Boise Cascade also ran a rock crushing operation, and this supplied roadbed for the streets and for the runway at the airport. It was located on Rock Creek, just off of Pine Mountain Drive. You all know where that is, we drive by it. And it was lamented by the local ranchers, according to Janet Hoyer, who's here with us today, that this rock crushing plant was both noisy and it blocked the path along Big Creek, so that locals who like to walk and ride their horses weren't really able to do so. So this business model worked really well for Boise Cascade. They had 9 developments in the state of California. And what they had, lumber to harvest because they buy the land. They had looked for places that had lakes and also recreation. And so here I've just selected a few of those developments. Some you might have heard of. Lake of the Pines, which is near Auburn. Lake Wildwood, which is about 10 miles west of Grass Valley. Spring Valley Lake, which is more southern California by Victorville, and Incline Village, believe it or not, on the north shore of Lake Tahoe in Nevada. Oh, which is where I live. Anyway, and then our neighbor, Lake Don Pedro. And by the way, Lake Don Pedro and PML shared the use of the lumber mill at Montezuma Junction. So this is a picture from 1969 of Pine Mountain Lake once it was filled. And if you think about this project, it was a mind-boggling scope of work. Think about the planning that had to go in, laying out 3,400 residential lots with amenities, construction of 52 miles of private road, the design and layout of a championship golf course, engineering an earth dam that was 120 feet high and 480 feet long to create our beautiful lake. And then of course there's building. Oh, we got a restaurant, we need a clubhouse, we need a pool, we need marinas, and more. And then of course there's scheduling the expert contractors to do the work. Well, this is where the project manager, Bert Pike, came in. He was at the center of all of this. He coordinated, planned, selected, organized, and monitored all of this work. Bert, by the way, did not like salespeople. I heard this from Terry Bruce, and I know Val Bruce is somewhere here in the audience too. And Terry told me some amazing stories that went down that line. Bert did not like people who were all talk and no action. Bert was indeed a man of action. Okay, somewhere in the middle of all this, Bert Pike came up with the idea to build an airport. No other Boise Cascade development includes an airport. So where did this idea come from? Okay, yeah, we know Bert served in the Army Air Corps in World War II, so he saw airplanes and what they could do. Maybe he thought the airport was an amenity. You know, kind of like the equestrian center, the golf, dining, the lake, tennis courts, because you could offer maybe higher valued lots. And, you know, Bert was a pilot, so maybe this is what his idea came from. During the early years of the project, Bert was living in Sonora. It was an hour drive away. Do you think braving Priest grave twice a day might have driven this idea? Or was it something else entirely? I don't know. We'll never know exactly what inspired the idea, but it was a great inspiration. In 1969, along with laying out and excavating 52 miles of road, the runway at the airport was excavated. It's on one of the highest points in the community at 2,930 feet elevation. There are a few spots that get up 73 feet higher at 3,003 feet, but that's why he selected the airport. The runway length is 3,600 feet long. From the very beginning, Bert intended to give the airport to the county. The Board of Supervisors was very excited about it, very supportive, and they viewed the airport as a county asset. Beginning early on, I found articles in the Union Democrat as early as June of 1969. These articles, numerous, quote the supervisors and their enthusiasm and the value they saw for this airport as one of their resources. The first aircraft to land on that dirt airfield, according to the Union Democrat, was on July 24th, 1969. That Union Democrat article did not state what aircraft or what pilot held that honor, but we know the truth. The aircraft was a Cessna 150. And by the way, that Cessna 150 still lives at the airport. That pilot in command was Les Miller. Yes, that Les Miller. Today he works for Suburban Propane. Look at that, see your mouth open. And his son runs Miller Brothers Automotive in Big Oak Flat. Yes, that Les Miller. His Cessna 150 still resides at the airport. It's owned by the Aldrich family, and the Aldrich family boasts 4 generations of pilots. And all of those generations have lived at Pine Mountain Lake at one time or another. So, this newly excavated dirt airfield had possibilities. Janet Hoyer, who grew up in Groveland, she told me stories of that summer of 1969. She lived nearby, along with children and other residents and ranchers in the area. They're out of school. It's the summer of '69. And immediately they saw the potential. No, it wasn't a road. No, it's not an airport. It is an an excellent dirt racetrack. We can challenge the riding skills of ourselves and our horses. So Janet still owns the family ranch, which is south of Ferretti Road. Her father, Ward Hoyer, was the fish and game warden up here. Ward and his wife Rose had transferred here from the Los Angeles area, and they called it God's country. And it is, isn't it? So maybe Stitches, I'm making my pitch here, maybe Stitches should get Janet as a future speaker. She has a lot of great stories. Okay, so this is a picture of Bert. Under Bert's direction, Boise Cascade's commitment to Groveland really came to life. He brought it to life. He gave Groveland a facelift. He partnered with Groveland locals to spruce up the town, and 20 buildings were painted. Boise Cascade supplied all of the paint and the materials. They matched work hours with the property owners 1 for 1, and they even spray painted the rusty rooftops of downtown buildings so that when airplanes fly over, the town looked awesome. It was a great result. You drove through town and it was way more appealing. And it was enjoyed by both the residents and travelers that came into the area. It was a brilliant splash of those early mining days. In this particular picture, Bert is standing in front of the Groveland Hotel. In front of him is a color chart for the buildings in town. The 1850 Groveland Hotel and the old schoolhouse, which today is Premier Valley Bank, were both purchased by Boise Cascade and renovated for the use of PML at that time. They used them for sales, information, and administration offices. Some years later, Bert purchased the hotel, but okay, that's a story for another time. So, at the end of 1969, the runway was paved. This picture, I saw there was copies over on the desk when you come in. So this is actually a 1970 photo, and you can see, look at that, you can see the old horse and cow trails of the ranchers. None of the roads were excavated or paved, but by January of 1970, it was paved, and on January 26th, the airport was certified by the State of California Department of Transportation, and that is a picture of its airport permit. I got my pilot's license here at Pine Mountain Lake Airport. I was a member of the PML Aero Club, which formed in 2009. And Larry Jobe, Nina's here, hi Nina. And Larry Jobe was my flight instructor. And as a pilot, this particular picture is one of my favorites, and I'm going to tell you why. So first, look closely at the runway. It's painted with the name of the airport and the elevation, 2930. But the thing that makes this unique is that the orientation of the name indicates that originally the airport had standard left traffic for runway 27, which is our main runway. Today, it is right traffic to minimize the community overflight. Next, I'd like you to look at these diamond shapes on the runway. If you go out to the airport today, what you will see is the standard runway markings. 120-foot dashes interrupted by 80-foot blank spaces. But in 1970, this was state-of-the-art runway marking. This diamond shape, and I'm sorry for those of you that are not pilots, I'm going to divert a little bit to pilot speak here. The diamond shape provided glide slope guidance so that the diamond shape appeared equidistant when you were viewed as you're coming in for a landing on a 3.5% glide slope. So on landing, a pilot would be looking for uniformly spaced diamonds and gaps. If you're too high, the diamonds are rectangular. If you're too low, the diamonds are elongated. Well, needless to say, this required a lot of pilot judgment, and it was later replaced by more accurate methods for glide slope guidance. And you'll see those at our airport today. We have a Baky on runway 09 and a Pappy on runway 27. Okay, end of my pilot talk. All right, back to the picture for a minute. Let's take a look at the transient parking area. This is in the same location as it is today, but look closely. There are 11 aircraft parked there. Boise Cascade was flying in prospective buyers. Salesmen picked them up in Jeeps and toured the development with them. So, U.S. Land is or at the time, was a subsidiary of Boise Cascade. Boise had acquired them in 1967 to handle real estate sales at all of their developments. The two pictures on the right show the sales office in the old schoolhouse, today's Premier Valley Bank. And look at all the cars parked around it. Buyers were met by a U.S. Land salesman in a Jeep because many of the roads were not yet paved, and they would tour the future amenities that were under construction: golf course, lake, country club, tennis courts, that kind of thing. And then they would go from there to look at property. And when a buyer's interest peaked, the salesman gets on his walkie-talkie. Oh, here, let's use this as my walkie-talkie. Click. We are in Unit 3 on a lot such and such. Is it available? Well, the main office would answer back, stand by. Then there'd be this long pause. No, I'm sorry, that lot has been taken. Of course, a prospective buyer hears all of this, so they drive to the next lot. Click. We are still in Unit 3. Now I'm at lot such and such. Is that available? Stand by. Long pause. No, I'm sorry, that has just been sold. It was a completely designed and architected sales approach. The buyer is hearing all of this, seeing the other Jeeps driving around, and it's creating a sense of urgency that everything is selling fast. Kind of stirs up a little frenzy. This continues with the buyer. Drive around, find a lot, click the walkie-talkie, and when the prospective buyer finally gets anxious, the salesman says, "This lot is available, do you want it?" Pushes the walkie-talkie in the customer's face, and the customer says, "Yes, yes!" On the way back to the office to sign the paperwork, the salesman zeroes in. "Well, you can see how these lots are selling. We have a couple of other lots that just might interest you. What we'll do is if you buy 2 lots, we will resell the second one for you next year. And you can double your money." The Union Democrat reported, obviously it was working. Sales were averaging 60 lots per week in 1969. But when the next year rolled around, U.S. Land ignored these buyers. None of those properties were resold. Did I mention that Bert Pike did not like or trust salespeople? Yeah, Val Bruce's husband Terry told me some stories that you might hear later, not in this talk. Okay, so kind of like this time of year, the dark clouds form up overhead over the Sierras, and a thundering downpour flooded Boise Cascade. First was a restraining order. Refrain from misrepresenting offers. Don't present future estimated values. By the end of the year, the end of 1972, Boise Cascade settled a class action lawsuit. The lawsuit represented multiple developments, which I showed you earlier, including Pine Mountain Lake, and the settlement was $58.5 million. Okay, don't go wow, because that was 1969 or 1972 dollars. In today's dollars, that's $450 million. The settlement was split between the buyers and the communities themselves. Repaid the lot buyers that were part of the settlement, and then the other dollars were invested in the communities in their administration and maintenance. And here it is, 1972, Boise Cascade got out of the real estate business. And by the way, in researching for a book I'm working on, Boise Cascade's records are closed, and they would not allow me access to learn anything from them, so I could only go to the public record. This is a 1972 picture of the airport. I think it was probably taken before the lawsuit was finalized. But look how different it is from the other one I showed you. The roads are being laid out, properties are being defined, a section of the south taxiway was paved, and this is why I think this was before the lawsuit. There are still 5 aircraft in the parking area. So, just taking that history a little further, February of 1973, 55 acres of Pine Mountain Lake Airport were transferred to Tuolumne County, and it became a public airport as planned. Local folklore says it was sold to the county for $1. I love the story, but I couldn't find any records to confirm that. On May 1st of 1973, that same year, the Pine Mountain Lake subdivision transferred from Boise Cascade to the Pine Mountain Lake Association. Bert transitioned into an executive role to ensure a smooth changeover. So if you find local history interesting, as I do, and want to learn more about South County, Groveland, and PML, these are 2 of my favorite books. My Town, A Groveland Kid Remembers, which is by a local, Dave Gookin. It was published in 2018. And the other one was published by STCHS, Images of America, Groveland, and Big Oak Flat, published in 2020. They're on sale at the Groveland Museum, and I think there's a few copies in the back that are available here tonight after we're done talking. I'm also working on a book. It's under construction, as it has been for, it's a long construction project. It's filled with lots of oral history as well as research. I haven't named it yet. It will be published in 2026, so next year, and I'll keep you all in the know as it comes together. So, at this point, I am honored to introduce Meredith Pike Baky, our next speaker. She's going to tell you about what Bert Pike's life was like before this 5 years I gave you a little snapshot of, and after. And he's the man who made PML and the airport a reality up here. And for those of you that might not know, tomorrow is our Community Airport Day at our airport from 11:30 to 3, and I invite you all to come join Airport Day. But when you're up there, stop into the airport office. You'll see the plaque that Meredith was looking for that calls Bert the father of our airport, or the founder of our airport. And there are also some other pictures from our PML airport history. So Meredith, I'll let you introduce yourself, and both Meredith and I will take questions after her presentation.
Hard to follow. Thank you all for coming. I think that there's a nice balance between what Janet has presented and what I have to share. She told us a lot about facts, and I have a lot about feelings. So this is the beginning presentation on my dad, Bert, and for much of my life, he was far away, both in spirit and in geography. I was very curious about him. So I want to tell you a little bit about me so you have some context for his story. I'm the eldest of 3 of his children. Oh, can you hear me now? I'm sorry. I'm the eldest of his 3 children. I was born in 1948, so I'm a baby boomer, big time. And he was born in 1914. So there were already some social, political, historical conditions that set us slightly apart. I was very curious about his life, and I set to studying it. And it began with a trip to Yosemite and a stop at the Groveland Airport. I was with my son. My daughter and grandson are with me tonight. I was with my son and his family, and we couldn't find the Groveland Airport. We drove all around. I knew Ferretti Road. We used a navigation system. We finally stumbled across a fence and found an airstrip, and there was a metal building off to the side. And I was looking for this plaque that honored my dad. I thought it would be so wonderful to share with my family. Couldn't find a plaque, as I remembered it had been mounted on a rock somewhere near the airstrip. And out of a metal building comes a woman. And I thought, I've got to ask her. We were 3 hours late getting to the airport, the airstrip. And I thought, there's no way I'm gonna find it. I have to give this up. And I shouted to her and I said, excuse me, we're looking for a plaque. And she said, are you looking for a plaque that honors Bert Pike? And I said, yes, he's my dad. And she said, we moved it in the office. That was my first encounter with Janet. And it's been a pretty wonderful relationship. So big thanks to you for allowing me to do all this work and share it with you. This is Janet, here's the plaque, and my son, and I can't wait to see it again tomorrow. The beginnings of my dad's life started in northwestern New Hampshire, and I invite you all to think about what it might be like to study a life. It's standing back, looking at the arc of one's years, no matter where you come from, who you are. Think about this as I go through this with my dad. It's not everything, but it's what I think emerges in a life that was very distinguished and very honorable. My dad was born into a prominent family in a village on the Connecticut River. It had been founded by his great uncle, and at that time farmers were using scythes to cut hay, and my great uncle, his great uncle, had discovered a schist in the water that was very good for sharpening blades. And he began manufacturing whetstones to sharpen sides and named the company after himself. So Pike Manufacturing Company rose up in a village. They hired tons of workers. Everything revolved around what became a whetstone mill. My father grew up in this house. He was the only son of the family, and he was very special to his family. This is my great-great-grandfather, Edwin Burbank Pike, who was head of the company, and my grandfather, Edwin Bertram Pike. My father was Edwin Bertram Pike II. He had an older sister and a younger sister, and he learned to enjoy nature, love animals. He was very active and very athletic from a young age. In 1923, my great-great-grandfather died, and there is an interesting tribute to him that my grandfather wrote, and it gives us a hint of what the expectations were for my father. And at that time, there were different expectations for men than there were for women, and I just wanted to share a couple of them with you. Lots of pressure. My grandfather said of his father that he was particularly distinctive. He added something to the world's struggle for growth and higher ground. He wanted to leave the world a little richer than he found it. And the family crest says, vrai à la fin, truth to the end. So a very prominent family with very high expectations for the children especially. My father learned to do everything from the very beginning. And in when my father was just an early teen, his dad died very unexpectedly. My dad had just started prep school. He was educated in Pike Village, and his family sent him off to prep school. He was the scrawniest kid on the rugby team, but he went on to Dartmouth. He was president of his fraternity. So it's about 1941. He wasn't quite sure. His father had passed away. He did some work for an oil company, a family-owned business in Arkansas. His sisters and mother had moved to the West Coast. They had left Pike, left New Hampshire, because one of my aunts had taken an interest in acting, and she got opportunities in LA and in California. So the family moved to the West Coast, and I think that's a key to my dad's. He spent his youth on the East Coast in New England and then came to the West Coast. And he was imbued with a work ethic that many of us wish we had today, at least those of us who are younger. He went to graduate school at Stanford and he majored in physical education. And this is in the early years of World War II, when the country needed soldiers and they needed recruits who were strong and fit. And with my father's graduate degree, he got opportunities to train young recruits all over the country. And a fun story is that he was quite innovative, and he had discovered the trampoline. And he used the trampoline as a training tool and for coordination and balance, and brought the trampoline to our very first home in the mid-50s. We had trampolines growing up. He went to officer candidate school and then continued to train young recruits. Here he is on the volleyball court, and there he is at the head of a group of soldiers. This is one of the grimmest pictures of him. But he was a very serious, very driven young man, and he loved the structure of the military. At the very end of the war, there were there was no longer a need to train pilots, but there was a surplus of pilot instructors. So my father and my uncle were offered pilot lessons, sort of on a whim, and they took the opportunity to learn to fly. My uncle, who's the fellow on the right, he was in the Navy, wasn't so interested in it after he had learned. My father fell in love with flying, and he was never too far from an opportunity to go somewhere in an airplane. This is his very first office. It's on an airfield in San Rafael. And he and at post-war, in Northern California, he and my uncle decided to go into business together. And they thought, well, there'll be lots of folks coming back, getting married, starting families. Maybe this is a good time to start a building business, to build homes. And so that's what they did with very little experience. My father was a quick learner. He loved putting things together, so he learned to hire people to help grow the business. So Pike and Hill is what began. In 1947, he married my mom in Berkeley, and he moved to a lot where my grandmother had bought a house on the 18th hole of the Diablo Country Club golf course at the base of Mount Diablo. It looked a little bit like that. Beautiful golf course in a beautiful, warm part of the Bay Area. And he and my uncle began building a house for my dad and mom, and it had a swimming pool and a gravel. It was very beautiful. And unfortunately, in 1952, when I was 4, the house caught fire and burned down. And up until this point, Pike and Hill construction was doing well, and one of their hired help convinced my dad and uncle to invest in some heavy machinery. And this, I think, is the root of why my dad had so much resentment towards salespeople, because they invested way too much money in the building machines and couldn't pay for them, and the business went bankrupt. So my father found himself in 1952 with no job, no home, and 3 young children. So he set to looking for work, and he found work across the bay in Marin County in Sausalito for a dredging company that was based in Sausalito. And he moved us to a rental home across the bay where my mom and he knew no one, but my dad had a very promising job. And at that time, the photo on the left is of the ferry, because the Richmond-San Rafael bridge didn't exist yet. So it was even farther away than it would have been if a bridge had been there. My mother was very isolated. We rented a series of homes until 1955, where we ended up moving. And this is a picture. He would bring live crabs home from his office on regular evenings, and we'd watch them crawl around on the kitchen floor. That's my brother looking a little bit querulous about what's going to happen. He was never too far from flying. As I said, he loved flying airplanes. He loved airplanes. This is the house he bought for our family in 1955 and set to learning everything about improving it. He re-landscaped it, had a swimming pool installed, added an additional room. And there we are in 1960. Things took a dramatic turn. He continued to work for the dredging company, but he and my mom parted. He remarried a woman maybe you have heard of. He remarried Josephine, who was a character, and they then moved 2 or 3 years later to Tahoe, where he had a similar job as he had had in San Rafael, which was basically taking sludge, filling land, making peninsulas for a resort called Tahoe Keys. And he lived at Tahoe for 3 years. It was a perfect training ground for Pine Mountain Lake. I had a picture of that I took out, but it was a series of peninsulas where residents could park their boats and be on the lake. In the late 60s, when he got the position with Boise Cascade, he and Josephine moved to Sonora. They lived in a stone house with 2 Russian wolfhounds called Ivan and Tanya. And they lived, I remember this house being very, very cold, and Dad would fly to Pine Mountain Lake as the development was being planned and built. And this is his first view, or an early view of the development, and a photograph of their house as it was under construction. They bought 2 lots, one lakeside and one with a view, and we had many discussions about which was better. Is it better to be near the water, or is it better to look out? And they opted for the house with the view, and they loved it. A friend, Tony Smith, one of Dad's colleagues, gave him a plaque that said Pike's Peak, P-E-E-K, and he spent most of his time on the deck around the house, looking out. He was never far from flying. He continued to hunt and fish. He loved to play golf. He did everything. I went on one flight with him. It was, of course, the scariest flight I've ever been on. But I survived. I joined the Peace Corps, and in 1974 I came back from West Africa. I'm teaching and traveling, and Josephine loved African food, African fabric, and begged me to bring as many clothes for them as I could. So this was my first reunion after not seeing my parents for 2.5 years. And we walked into the Pine Mountain Lake Clubhouse, all dressed in Africa. There we are, sitting on the table, and everybody was shocked to see my father like this. It was very, very fun for me. They continued to be very interested in Africa, and they went on another tour of Africa on the east side, over Victoria Falls with the Airline Pilots Association. And my dad was always interested in the finer engineering touches of everywhere he visited. In the late 70s, I went to Egypt to teach with the Ministry of Education, and they came to visit me in Egypt, and we went on a cruise up the Nile, we went to the Aswan Dam, and going through the photo albums, all I found were pictures of the engineering feats of the dam on the Nile River. They traveled everywhere. They had timeshare in Cancun, Mexico. They went to Eastern Europe. They went to Russia. They loved to travel, and my father always took, I have a huge bin of annotated photo albums of every detail of every trip. Unfortunately, in their very last trip, when they went around the world, on the way down, descending into San Francisco airport, my dad bent over, some glasses fell out of his pocket, and he had a stroke. Maybe reaching for the glasses, we're not quite sure, but it was the end of a month of travel, and I suppose he was fairly exhausted and stressed out. And he lived with a stroke for 7 years. He was wheelchair bound, he couldn't walk without assistance. He was very emotional, but mostly nonverbal. We visited him often. He was as sweet as could be. It was, as you can imagine, very frustrating for Josephine. As he was nearing his final days, my sister and I were up visiting him. He was in bed at the time, and I remember my sister telling me that she was sitting next to him and trying to encourage him to just be at peace and take death as it is. And she said to him, you know, Dad, when it comes near the end, you're going to go through a tunnel and there are going to be lights. And he looked up at her and he said, for God's sake, I built most of those tunnels. So he was living his dream. The chimes from northern New Hampshire came to Pine Mountain Lake, not terribly appreciated by golfers. He brought a spirit, an appreciation for nature. He loved it here. He really loved it. And so he lived his dream and he shared it with us. So he died in 1990, and they put a plaque at the airport, as Janet has explained, to honor him. So thank you so much.
Questions, comments, corrections?
Are you going to ask questions or answer questions?
Oh, I can ask a question. Take the mic down.
I guess this is where we say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, and I think what's so dramatic to me is to see the impact an individual can have that created a community that we all call home. And in this 5 to 6 year period of his life, he actually continued to call Pine Mountain Lake his home, had the house that was here, and this was their home base when he and Josephine were traveling. So anyway, and thank you so much for coming up, Meredith, so that we could share some of the stories. And Meredith, thank you for having us here, and we have some of those books in the back if anybody's interested.
I know that you must have some questions. Yes, here's one.
Okay. What firm or firms did all of the plans for subdividing the lots and the roads and what we today see as Pine Mountain Lake? Who engineered that? Who actually planned it?
Well, I don't know who assisted Bert. I can look into that. A lot of the information I gathered, I've been working on a history of our airport, and you can't disconnect the airport from the community. But that's a great question, and maybe STCHS should get someone from the administration office to come and talk about it. We should know the answer to that. That is a great question.
Any other questions? Yes.
Where was the plaque originally located at?
It was originally on the outside of the airport building, and then as there were some renovations were done, and needless to say, the weather up here, the sun and all that, was deteriorating the plaque, so it got moved inside, and today it's been kind of cleaned up, and it sits inside the airport office. Yeah. So go see it tomorrow.
So I was a bit confused about the lake. Was the lake dam built before they bought the property, before Boise Cascade Road?
No, Boise Cascade and their contractors actually built the dam. And there was a confluence of sort of 3 creeks that came together, And the putting in the dam actually required rerouting Ferretti Road, because Ferretti Road ran down and would have ultimately been underwater. So they had to re-engineer these things. This was part of the original vision that Boise Cascade had to turn this into a recreational community.
Meredith, did you or any of your siblings get your pilot's license? Nope.
I heard one scary flight.
But, you know, when Janet invited me to come on, this is a pretty wonderful story. Janet was doing research on the airport. Janet was doing research on the airstrip and the community and invited me to come up. So I came up a few months after we met, that wonderful serendipitous meeting at the airstrip. And she set up a series of interviews with 3 people who had either known my dad or who had almost known him. So I interviewed a number of people, and then she took me on a flight, and we mimicked the route that my dad had flown from Sonora to Groveland. It was just fabulous. I gathered so much information, and I went back to write it all up, and it's, I'm a writer, and I'm still teaching, and I run a writing retreat, but there's so much to say, and it's so hard to know how to, I'm just too close to the subject to make it really anything worth reading, frankly. Yeah, thanks. Anyone else?
What was scary about that flight? Was it just the idea that it was a little plane, or was
No, it was very turbulent. And I was really incredibly, even my father, by the time we got up there, and he was very serious. He wasn't particularly expressive. So we walked in the house, and Josephine said, "How'd it go?" And he said, "It's a little rough." That meant it was really rough. Yeah.
Is the original family house still here? Is it still as it was, or?
The question is your family's house still here, if I may?
Yes, yeah, it's completely overgrown. There are trees that I didn't know existed. Janet and I drove past it. And it's owned by somebody, but it doesn't belong to us. Yeah.
Microphone.
Oh. Oh.
I have the location in my notes, I just don't have it on the
It's
top.
on Pleasant View,
Oh.
and it's, what I said, did you hear what I said? It's complete, Janet and I drove past it 3 or 4 years ago. It's surrounded by bushes and trees. You can barely see the deck. It's obscured by trees. It's sad. Yeah, they took very good care of it. And it was beautiful, yeah.
Well, the other thing is, if you remember in Meredith's presentation, she had a picture of the house. You're kind of standing behind the house, and you can look down at the lake. And that is a result of the clear cutting that Boise Cascade did. And all this growth has really occurred in these last 50 years, because the reason why is this road called Pleasant View when you drive down it? Because it's just a pleasant view of all these tall trees surrounding it. But at the time, it was indeed a pleasant view.
It was quite beautiful.
Question.
You mentioned that your family came from, well, on the East Coast. Did the extended family still have a business interests in the East Coast that that part of the family is still going?
Great question. We grew up in California, right? With a sense of great pride at being Pikes from Pike. But Pike, when my grandmother left, she sold the family home, this massive, and it became this massive 4-story home that became sort of a seedy hotel, restaurant hotel. And my grandfather had founded a resort on Lake Tarleton in the White Mountains, and my father sold that. My brother never forgave my father for that. And I don't know what that was about. I wasn't around at the time. So you'd think that all of this family history would result in something somewhat more dignified than it did for those of us who were moved to the West Coast. I've been to Pike multiple times. I've interviewed a few people who, and the last time I was there, I went to the graveyard where my grandfather and all of his siblings are buried, and a local painter and I cleaned the gravestones of my grandfather and his siblings, and it was fantastic. It was an amazing experience. All that history, I mean, we all have it, right? Mm-hmm. And it was somewhat magical. I probably know more about Pike, New Hampshire, this little village that is hard to find on a map, than I know about Pine Mountain Lake, which is unfortunate. I sure lived it through my teens and 20s and 30s, but there's something so romantic about going back east and visiting my father's village. Yeah. Anyone else?
Thank you all for being here, and we can wander around if there are some other questions later.
A couple more.
Should we take a couple more? Or?
A couple more.
Yeah, I just,
If you need to go, please feel free to.
about your family crest or coat of arms.
Yes.
What is the fish on there?
Yes.
Are those supposed to be northern pike?
Probably, which are mean fish. They're very mean. They're ferocious. So I always sort of said, don't call me a pike or a piker. But yes, the coat of arms are 3 fish. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. One more question? Yeah.
How much were the lots?
Oh, good question. How much were the lots, Janet?
How much did the lots cost?
They were cheap.
I don't have that off the top of my head. I apologize, and I don't want to quote my feeble memory.
You know, we can get that information pretty easily.
We do know that no one was expected to live in Pine Mountain Lake year-round. The early houses that were built were cabins with no garages, no insulation. I think the idea was you drop your kids off at the beach and you go play golf and then you fly home to someplace real, but here we all are.
Thank you so much.